EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. The most prestigious of the Pulitzer Prizes is for public service. This year, the award goes to the staff of the South Florida Sun Sentinel for exposing failings by school and law enforcement officials before and after a mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. 17 people were killed and dozens more seriously injured. Joining us today are two members of the prize-winning newsroom team, Scott Travis, who has covered education in the region for 20 years, and Aric Chokey, a data journalist who joined the paper 2 years ago. Scott, welcome to EWA Radio.
Thank you, Emily, for having us.
Aric, we're very pleased to have you here as well.
Glad to be here.
Scott, I want to start with you and start where this story begins in a lot of ways, and that was February 14th, 2018. Tell us about that day for you.
February 14th, 2018, it was just a normal day. It was Valentine's Day, and I was working on some routine story. I don't even remember what it was, but we got a notice on a service that we have that monitors the scanners from law enforcement that said that there was a kid at Stoneman Douglas with an AR-15. So as soon as my editor heard that, she said, "You're going to have to go right now. Head out there, see what you can find out." And I just rushed out there. I talked to a couple of folks on the phone. I remember talking to one of my colleagues saying, "I really hope that this is fake, that this is just a false alarm." I even called a school board member to see if she knew what was going on. She said she heard a report that it was either fireworks or gunfire. And I said, "Please, I hope it's fireworks." We really didn't want to be in the midst of a huge story at that time. I just wanted everything to be okay.
Aric, what do you remember? Where were you on that day in the newsroom?
At that time, I was a municipal government reporter, and I also helped out with breaking news here and there. So I had gotten a call from our breaking news editor about a little bit before my shift started that day, and he was like, "Hey, we think there might be a shooting at this school," which I had never been to before. So I immediately got in my car and headed towards the school. You know, as I got close to this school, I started to see the outskirts of the whole situation. I saw a lot of parents, jumping out of their cars, and after witnessing that, I thought to myself, okay, this has to be something. Something's going on here.
Scott, how quickly did you realize the scale of this tragedy?
I think it was when I kept hearing all the sirens everywhere when I was driving there. And then I got too close to the school and they wouldn't let me anywhere near. The sheriff's office was blocking entrance for not only me, but parents and others who wanted to get there. And I went to the deputy and I said, "I'm with the Sun Sentinel. Can I get there?" He said, "No, you have to stay back here." So I was there with parents that didn't know what were going on. And I saw a lot of them huddling together and crying and praying. And I started asking them what was going on. And some of them had heard from kids and they'd said that there was a shooting and that they'd seen dead bodies and that their friends might have been killed. And it was just awful. And I was just literally in shock. I was such in shock. I just remember it was hard to even think clearly to ask the question that a journalist asked, because I just had to get my head around the fact that this was something I had never dealt with in my entire life.
What did you do in terms of preserving those moments and what you were seeing and hearing? I mean, obviously you have a reporter's notebook and a pen, but I'm thinking the intensity of that, it had to go beyond anything you could write down.
It was, and that was one of the advantages of having a phone these days that does everything, including audio recording, video recording, photos, all that. I really used my phone to the best advantage possible by videotaping what I could see. I started talking to parents and I would record the conversations. And I started taking pictures of everything that was around there. And then when students started coming out, when they would let them out, I started doing some interviews and I got some really heartbreaking interviews with this girl that was just talking about how she just walked past dead bodies and that they heard what they thought was firecrackers and nobody knew what was going on. And then they thought that it was a fire alarm. And a lot of kids started leaving the school because they thought that this was a fire alarm, and that just put them in more danger. And nobody really knew what to do, and it was just the scariest situation possible.
Aric, what were you gathering in those early hours after the shooting happened?
The spot that I was kind of set up at, it was near one of the points that they were evacuating some of the students. So I would see a lot of the students gathered by the police tape, waiting to see, who came out and who didn't. Essentially, there were lines of kids just coming out, with their hands on their head, like a lot of the pictures from that day show. Students would see their friends come out, and as soon as they exited the perimeter, they would hug and cry and say how everything was okay, that they were safe, and that they were just glad to make it out of there.
Scott, how important was your time on the beat here? There were national reporters parachuting in on a daily basis. What kind of sources were you able to tap?
Yeah, that was an advantage that I had that a lot of folks didn't. Now, I will say one disadvantage we had was access by the school district. We were given absolutely no special access because we're the local guys. In fact, it felt like it might have even been the opposite. But we do have a lot of sources. A lot of us already knew some Stoneman Douglas teachers from our work covering the beat. So we started calling, and they recognized our number. So sometimes they would take our calls when they might not take others. I know some of the union officials that probably weren't obvious to the national reporters. And I knew some former school district employees, which are not ones that anyone would think of calling, former security specialists and former administrators that were in charge of the school district police or of safety. And they were able to provide me a lot of information about what had been planned, what measures had been taken in the past to try to prepare for a situation like this, and did everything go as planned. And one of the things that we realized is that the school district has a very bad habit of planning to do something and just taking a really long time to do it, and training and locking down schools to make sure that they're as secure as they need to be. That's one of the things that they really weren't as prepared for as they should have been.
I'm interested in how, in a lot of ways, this is a story about local journalism and the impact those relationships have on the community. Aric, how important do you think it was for people to see the newspaper as their local source of news?
I think it was immensely important. I mean, even still to this day, we still interact with the parents and some of the students that were involved that day. So I think it was, really important to take up that flag and show that, we were just as concerned as our community about this, and show that we were asking the same questions that a lot of the parents that live near us basically wanted to know about what happened that day and how the tragedy could happen.
One of the things that we were able to do that really kind of got us noticed immediately was running a video from David Hogg, who, as you know, became a huge international celebrity after this event happened. He was actually a student journalist with us who had written for a teen section that we had with the Sun Sentinel. So the editor who was in charge of that called him instantly, and sure enough, he had taken a video of what had gone on, interviewing kids in the library where they were huddling while this incident was going on. So we showed that video, and that was one of the things that instantly propelled him to being a very well-known figure in the March for Our Lives movement.
We're talking with education reporter Scott Travis and data journalist Aric Chokey. They're part of the Pulitzer Prize winning team from the South Florida Sun Sentinel for their coverage of Parkland. Don't miss an episode of EWA Radio. You never have to. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Your support and feedback will help us grow. There was a lot of pushback to the paper's reporting, particularly by the local school board and district administration, and one reporter was even threatened with jail time. Scott, give us an idea of some of the stonewalling you encountered.
Yeah, it was very difficult to deal with the school district. It never has been particularly easy, but it felt like it got even more challenging after this happened. The first couple of weeks when we would send out for public records requests, we would get a response back that said, the school district is not fulfilling any requests related to Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. that's not something they can do by law, and they had to change that. But it was an example of how guarded they were in the early days of the information. And then even after they realized they couldn't do that, they still would find every single reason to not give us information. They cited privacy laws a lot. They cited security exemptions to the public records law. And there really wasn't a whole lot that we knew about what they were doing to try to get to the bottom of what happened. They did hire a company to do what was supposed to be a comprehensive review of the killer's education history that was supposed to answer all these questions that they wouldn't answer for us. They just, every time we'd answer a question, they'd say, oh, well, that's all going to be looked at with this review. And we expected it was going to be something that was just the most comprehensive report that you could ever imagine. It turned out to be very limited. And when we first got it, 2/3 of it was blacked out because of student privacy issues that they didn't tell us ahead of time that was going to happen. And then when we were able to discover that they had redacted it in such a way that all you needed to do is copy and paste it and you could actually read the full report, we did a story about the full report, and they tried to hold us in contempt of court because we'd been involved in a lawsuit involving that case. So they were trying to get the judge to hold us in contempt of court, which would have been a criminal charge and possibly sending reporters to jail for doing that.
We should point out you're certainly not the first newsroom to figure out that cut and paste trick. And I know, after talking with you folks about that, I heard from a lot of people who went back to look at old redacted reports and to give it a try.
Yes, I did the same thing.
I think that's understandable. But, in spite of this pushback, we should point out that there was a lot of action that followed your reporting, including, people being held accountable, in some cases losing their jobs. One of the most gripping pieces of journalism, I think, that you put together, Aric, I want to talk to you about this as the paper's data journalist. And that was an interactive timeline in which you used video images from the shooting, from the school security cameras, to walk your audience through the scene moment by moment. Explain to me how this came to you and how you laid it out.
Over the previous 10 months that our staff had been on, we had compiled so many different instances of the red flags or the misinformation. And I think we had all of these individual stories that we wanted to put in a chronological narrative and explain what exactly went on that day. All of the groundwork that our reporters had done as far as getting records and getting surveillance video and firsthand accounts, we kind of wanted to wrap that into one experience. So that was kind of the crux of the project itself. Luckily, we did have success in getting, all kinds of different video assets and audio from the scene that day, and answering that question of, how did this happen and how was the response to it, that kind of drove our building of that whole interactive.
There's so much research now, though, that people's memories are sometimes faulty to a surprising degree, especially after trauma. How did you verify what you were told about what people remember, about where they were and what they saw?
A lot of that was kind of corroborated with a lot of the surveillance video footage, first of all, that we had gotten from the district and all of the official records that we had gotten. We had reporters scouring police scanner audio from that day, where you could hear police talk about, for example, the delay in the video that the law enforcement thought was live at the time. So a lot of that was corroborated by the on-the-scene footage that we had gotten in audio from law enforcement.
And also the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission, which reviewed what happened in this tragedy. They did a really good job of putting together a timeline of some of the events and a minute-by-minute look at what happened and when people got shot and when they entered the buildings and that type thing. So that was a great help in producing that piece of work as well.
I have to admit, there are a lot of stunning details in all of the reporting done by the Sun Sentinel team, and we certainly congratulate each individual reporter in the newsroom as a unit. But what really shocked me was finding out that video camera was on that 20-minute delay, and that by the time law enforcement got there, the carnage was actually over. Scott, was there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I think there were several things that surprised me. Probably the two biggest ones had to do with the efforts or the lack of efforts to protect students on that day. One of them was the fact that the school resource officer that they had basically didn't do anything except sit on his radio and try to stop traffic from coming in when 17, or he didn't know how many people, but he knew that that people were being shot in that building and that there was an emergency situation, and that his job as a police officer is to protect the community. As a school resource officer, that's why he was there, was to protect the kids. And he wouldn't do it. And I just could not fathom why that would have happened. And why was he there if he wasn't going to do his job? And the other thing that really shocked me was that there is a security guard that knew about all of this killer's problems in the school and how dangerous, that he called him crazy boy and had said that if there was going to be a kid that was going to shoot up the school, this was going to be it. He watches him go in with a rifle bag and does not do a thing to stop him. He does not call a code red. He does not say, hey, you can't go in there. He doesn't do anything except for calling another security official and say, hey, this guy's here. And that guy went and hid in the closet. And one of the things that I found out is that he wasn't even necessarily doing anything that wasn't allowed in his job, because the training was so bad. No one had ever given the security officials at the school training on the proper way to handle a situation like this. So they either didn't know what to do or they went by their instincts. And it was very, very unfortunate that day.
I want to turn for a moment and talk about the Pulitzer Prize experience. I've actually been fortunate enough to be in a newsroom that won the Public Service Prize, but it was back in the days before the live stream, and we just sat at our computers frantically refreshing the browser. What was it like that day in the Sun Sentinel newsroom? Aric, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, we had our entire newsroom just kind of huddled around a couple TVs as we had the live stream playing. And so many of our reporters are heavily involved. They cried, broke into tears. As soon as we had heard the announcement, there wasn't any cheering. It was just a lot of gratefulness and crying, and a lot of people hugging each other. I remember, one of the reporters say, "We got it for them," alluding to the victims of the tragedy itself.
Scott, you said something I thought that was very appropriate, but also very poignant on Twitter in sort of downplaying any excitement that you might be feeling about this moment. Share that with us.
Yeah, what I said on Twitter was that I felt a sense of gratitude and I was overwhelmed, but I was also very sad because we received this award because we wrote about a tragedy that never should have happened. It was very preventable. And one of the things that I noticed when they announced it was I didn't have this great sense of elation like I had just won the lottery or I had just gotten a great new job that I was excited about. I had this real heartfelt sense of gratitude and sadness. And I thought that this isn't why I got into the business. I never wanted to win a prize by writing about 17 people or anybody getting brutally murdered and having to go through as much horror as these families have had to go through. That's not what I ever wanted to do. But I also felt a sense of gratitude that I realized that the work that we did made a difference.
Scott, looking back at your reporting over this period, is there something you wish you could go back and tackle differently? Is there a lesson learned here that might help other reporters down the road?
I think there's a few things that I think we probably could have done differently. And one of them might have been maybe being a little bit more mindful about the impact that writing about the killer has on the community. And we did some stories probably early on that some people thought glorified him. And I think we ended up sharing on social media a manifesto that he did that was a video. And it was the first thing that they would see on their social media a lot of times. And it was really difficult to watch for some folks. So I think that's one thing that we probably could have done differently. I'm not one who believes that we shouldn't have named the killer because I think that's important for historical purposes. But I think that we don't have to write about him extensively, and we could have given a little bit more attention early on to the victims.
Aric, you're right at the beginning of your journalism career, and I think it's going to be a long and fruitful one. What do you take away from this experience?
You know, we had the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting I think it was a little more than a year before this one. So unfortunately, I don't think this is going to be, the last time a shooting is reported on this scale. And statistically, I'm probably likely to have to cover another one eventually. So just knowing that, I think this was an experience that I will, take to any other mass casualty event that I might inevitably, have to cover in the future.
Scott Travis has covered education in the South Florida region for 20 years. Aric Chokey is a data journalist. They are both part of the Pulitzer Prize winning team at the South Florida Sun Sentinel. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks a lot.
And that wraps up another episode for us. If there's a story you'd like to know more about, drop us a line. We're at radio@ewa.org. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, and thanks for listening.